please help me welcome to the stage the director of the film that won the Audience Award at the Toronto Film Festival, Mr. Peter Farrelly. From Tall King to Tony Lip, Viggo Mortensen. And Mahershala. Well, we're out of time with everybody.
Thank you very much.
Because there's so much to talk about. First of all, movies are all about two guys falling in love with each other.
I don't know how that happens. Like someone just, pointed out recently that, a lot of road trips. I don't think, what's the next road trip I can do? But pretty much all the good ones are road trips. And all I can say is I love driving cross country. I've done it 22 times. 16 alone. I highly recommend it if you're ever confused about what to do next in life. It clears your head. I just get in the car and go for 4 or 5 days. But yeah, I don't know why. I just love I love that story. But obviously, this story came to me, and that was already, that was the story. And that wasn't what drew me to it. But I don't know what to say about that.
What was your first thought when you saw the script? What did make you want?
Well, I didn't see the script. It was an idea, and a friend of mine named Brian Hayes Curry, who's an actor, I bumped into him and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm writing a screenplay with my buddy. It's a true story about this." And he gave me the one line. He goes, "This black concert pianist named Don Shirley in 1962, his record company was sending him on a tour of the Deep South. He was nervous about going, so he hired the toughest bouncer from the Copacabana nightclub in New York, an Italian guy with a 6th grade education who never really paid attention after 3rd grade, to drive him. And Tony Lip the Italian guy was racist himself, and yet somehow, after 2 months together, they became lifelong friends. And I was like, are you shitting me? This is a home run. And I actually thought about it for about 2 months. I was thinking, why can't I come up with something like that? And finally I called him and said, "How's that script coming?" He said, "What script?" I said, "The one you told me about." He goes, "Which one?" I said, "It's a concert pianist with the Italian guy." He said, "Oh, I haven't started it." I said, "Can I write it with you?" And so I got together with him and Nick Vallalonga, Tony Lip's son, and we wrote it.
Okay. What I was saying to you before we came in here, Mahershala, is that I think this is the most physical performance I've ever seen you give. I'm so aware of his body the entire time. I told you the first time I saw it, my back was hurting. Afterwards, just watching that posture. Talk about finding that guy there.
Thank you for that, by the way. Because I think it's subtle, but it was something I was really conscious of. I got my hands on some footage via Pete of Mr. Shirley, and one of the first things I noticed was his posture. And it was almost like his back was back, and so it was like one of the first things I started working on, and then the entirety of my back would kill me. And can't hear me? Oh. Oh, okay. Well, it was one of the first things that I started working on after seeing some footage of Dr. Shirley in a documentary. And to the point where it was really uncomfortable, but eventually I kind of eased into it. But it also helped me with the voice and speech work, because I worked with a woman by the name of Denise Woods. Just because I needed to, the way in which he played the piano was the way in which he spoke.
And he also projected as if you were speaking to be heard every
Yes.
time you speak.
Everything was conscious and very deliberate in how he spoke, how he touched something, how he picked something up, his gestures, and I could pick that up on the little bit of footage that I saw. So that was a big help for me, because I always had that to lean on. And when you're building a character, you have to look for the one in Moonlight. What I did with that was I'm thinking about Miami and the heat, and so I just allowed everything to drop, and the show.
He's all show orders.
And be a little bit more sluggish and move like a slug, and so Don Shirley is the opposite of that. And so that was something that I tried to incorporate into the character.
But the two really physical performances, the thing you can't help but notice in watching this movie is how each one of these characters uses his hands. And Tony's like constantly got his hands out in front of him. And talk about that with Viggo, because that's a really interesting physicalization too.
Yeah, I mean, you can, I suppose you could start there and just do gestures and copy gestures or something like that, but you don't go so far if you do that. I think that has to be an outgrowth of everything else that you gather in terms of information, what you look at, music you listen to. You know, when I met, what really helped me was Nick Vallelonga and him, the gift of his family. He said, I want you to meet my family, come and eat with us, come and talk, and spent many hours with them in New Jersey, Long Island, up to the Bronx. You know, I mean, I just talked with those guys a lot and listened to them. What did Tony listen to? So as I was even looking at images, sometimes listening to recordings that they gave me of Tony talking about many things, but also about this trip and about the friendship with Doc Shirley. I would listen to that, then I would be looking at photographs. I was looking at other photographs from the era, just sort of soaking up everything from what was his childhood. I mean, I basically asked myself always the same question, whether the character's fictional or not. What happened before page one? You know, and that sounds like a simple question, but it can have, there's an infinite number of answers to that, from where was he born, or where was she born, what were the circumstances like, the parents, the family, where, how, you know, did he grow up, so forth. And you go from there. And so at first it's just a massive information, and you keep it all there. I have stacks, whether it's books, photographs, recordings, and the whole while, and then looking at the script and going over it. It's such a good script. And Mahershala said very well at a previous Q&A, he said, you know, our job was really to stay out of the way and let the script work as much as possible. I mean, yes, you have to prepare, but it is true. You have a script like this and dialogue like this. It's just, I mean, it's so helpful, I mean, to you as an actor. But, you know, I would put on music that I knew that he used to listen to, music that he would have heard in the Bronx as he was growing up in the post-World War II era. And just keep taking stuff in there. Then when you get to shoot, you know, most of that stuff has no bearing on what you're going to say or do, but it's all there. And out of that stuff, out of watching the Vallelongas, listening to them, watching other footage, documentaries, everything, listening to music, you start getting a rhythm physically. Also, like getting bigger, like I did for the role, and getting stronger, and like going to the gym in a certain particular way, eating a lot of food. I mean, that was the easiest thing. It was the easiest and most fun thing about preparing. And not as much fun going the other direction afterwards, but or trying to. But all of that stuff together, out of that comes those gestures. You know, it's just like, okay, you get in the car like that when you weigh that much, and then you're listening. And I'm watching Nick. Fortunately, I wish he was here. He's big too, and big personality. And he was there every day on the set, and so I could look at him, refer to him, listen to him, ask him little things about his dad. So I know he likes to eat, he likes to smoke, and you said often at the same time. But what hand and how does he hold? You know, just little things like that. All those things come out, but without even thinking about it. Once you're speaking in the right way, once you're moving in the right way, you're walking in the right way, everything follows. You know, I guess it's like a dancing thing. You get certain things right, and then the arms will follow, and the hands will go with those kinds of words. And whether you're speaking with that kind of dialect, certainly speaking Italian. I mean, I didn't even have to think about it when I'm talking Italian with my father in the story, and then watching the movie after. It's like, I didn't even realize I was doing that. You just have to trust what you've prepared, and those things come. Like you're constantly thinking about this posture thing, but I'll bet once you got going, it was there. It informed everything, right?
A lot of what you're saying, though, is in terms of immersing yourself in the world of that character, the music, things they would have seen, things that are important to them. For me, especially the music element of it, and not specific to this story, but just in any of these stories, and finding the things that your character would listen to or be exposed to. all gets down to the awareness of frequencies and knowing that your frequency is different from a character's frequency, and it can only be different once you do the work to allow your frequency to be shifted, to change. And so therefore, then you're looking at somebody that is actually different from you.
But it's interesting because these two guys are both, and I want to get you on this too, Pete.
Pete, look, you listened to a ton of music too, didn't you?
It was almost like a musical. There's so much music in this movie. In fact, it starts off with a big musical number. And I think of you as being kind of a frustrated musical director anyway, because there's a big musical number in every movie you've done, basically. And
that's my favorite part of making any movie is the music part. Like when you, at the end, the hardest part is writing it for me. And then shooting it is just making sure you get what you took all that time to write. And then when you get in the editing room, you put it together, that's joyful. You're seeing, you did all the hard work and you get a puzzle and you're putting it together. And when you finally lay that music over it, your heart soars. You know, it just comes alive, it pops. And it's such a high. So I always listen to music, new, old, I'm like, I go to concerts with new bands all the time, and I'm the oldest guy in the room, and I'm looking around, I'm like, what happened to everybody? When I was a teenager, we'd have like 13,000 people seeing Led Zeppelin. How come they're not still going to concerts? I don't get that. I don't know when that point came where they're like, okay, I'm done with music. I never lost interest in music. I love it. I love the old stuff and I love the new stuff. So yeah, I do like that.
There's a big, again, there's almost, in every movie you make, there's a big musical sequence.
Music carries the movies. I mean, it's an important part. If you saw it without music and saw it after, you'd be shocked how much better it is, especially when it's the right music. And we sit there, I have a great music supervisor named Tom Wolf. He's been on all my movies. He works with a guy named Manish Ravel, and they're amazing. And they constantly, year-round, send me songs, and I'm always playing it in my car and just listen to it. And then we sit in the editing room and we try different things. And occasionally you just get something magical happens. And it's sometimes it's a new song, sometimes like it's an old song. I remember the moment in Kingpin when Woody and Bill Murray have the big match at the end, and we put in, we had like 1 million songs in there, and finally someone said, what about Showdown, ELO? Laid it in there, and I'm telling you, we didn't have to cut a frame. We didn't have to change anything. It starts with the, and Bill Murray's actually doing that. And then it goes, and the ball was hitting the pins at exactly the right moments, and it was just magical. And that's the one of all of them that I am most proud of. I didn't do anything except lay it in, but it really, really worked.
Because there's an energy that comes to your films from music too, that really drives them. And I was just thinking about the movies being bookended by these musical numbers. So Bobby Rydell at the beginning, and then Dr. Shirley playing at the end. And about one being about people not knowing how to control themselves, and others about people being roused by music. And there's a really kind of beautiful musical transgression, or rather progression, not transgression, forgive me, progression in that. And it's such a beautiful idea.
Well, we had a great composer named Chris Bauer, who's unbelievable. He played a lot of the piano in the movie, and he also composed it. Yeah, he's crazy good. And so he found this balance that was, I just stayed out of it. I know what I don't know, and that I don't know. It's like, when I have a wardrobe person, like, I hire them and I just say, get your stuff. I don't even tell them, like, I want a yellow dress on her. How do I know? What would you think I could have dressed him the way he was dressed in that movie? I have no idea. He would have been like this, And so I had Betsy Hyman, who is world class. And by the way, I should tell you, she called us after she read the script and said, I'd like to do this. I said, I can't afford you. At that time, we had a $10 million budget. And I think, she's worked on Quentin Tarantino movies, many big movies. I said, I can't afford you. She goes, I really want to work on this. I said, I can't afford you. I'm telling you. She goes, I'll take the cut. I said, I couldn't even afford the cut you'd take. And she said, no, I just keep cutting. I want to do it. I said, you'd lose money at the point where I could use you. And she said, I don't care, I want to do it. And I said, I don't feel good about it. She said, are you an asshole? I'm telling you, I want to do it. I said, okay, all right, you're in. And she probably lost money on this movie. But she came in and dressed him, and I just let them figure it out. I like, whatever you like there, it looks good to me. But what I wanted to say about the music is I didn't know the composing, how to tie it into the songs in the movie. But I did know what I wanted for the radio music. And what I wanted was songs that were from the era that are great, but not the ones we've heard a million times. I live my crib on Blueberry Hill. I didn't want those. I didn't want the Happy Days songs. I wanted all the songs that were great, but we didn't know, and I had to look far and wide for those.
It's a pretty great collection of stuff. Well, I'm going to talk to you guys too, because so much of this movie to me is about pride. And for Don, it's about control. And Tony is about freedom, and he's completely free of himself. And those two sort of physical poles represent the differences in race in a lot of ways for me. I want you guys to talk about that control versus freedom.
Well, being a white guy, I had the luxury of being free with my gestures and my opinions, you know, at that time. I mean, one thing about having the movie set at a remove historically 56 years ago is that there's no question about how people spoke, how people allowed themselves to speak about other people, the kind of language they used, the kind of laws that were on the books, you know, things that seem unbelievable now. That
No, they don't.
Not really.
Well, no, and not always it does. I mean, those things evolve, and you don't use certain words, but you do other things. You know, as we know, there's a lot of, you know, yesterday voter suppression. You know, we know the effects of gerrymandering. We know the effects of all that stuff. There's many insidious ways that prejudice evolves and remains. But you know, when people say, I'm going off on a tangent, but why not? It's important. When people say, well, it's, you know, it's so disheartening that so little progress has been made in so many areas in that regard, racism, so forth. So what is it? I mean, why is it that so long after the Civil Rights Act we have this climate now? And I say, well, you know, I'm not saying be happy about it. I'm just saying don't be shocked. It's human nature. And every generation has to work on that. Every generation. It's like ignoring that death exists. It's like, yeah, guess what? You're gonna die. You don't have to like be morbid about it, but to ignore it until it's like almost there and then go, ah, you know, it's like, my approach is, well, get the most out of life. Do things, learn things, evolve as much as you can, because someday the dance is over. And as far as, I mean, every generation of little kids, really small kids, they play together. They don't think about what color the other kids are, whether they have all their arms and legs, or whether they understand what language they're speaking, what their hair texture is like. I mean, they just don't. And then somehow everywhere in the world, kids learn from their parents, from their environment, from institutions. As they get a little older, they learn to differentiate, to see themselves as above or beneath or beside, or they just differentiate. They notice differences, and it affects their behavior. And then if they're lucky, each person at some point, hopefully in adolescence, but more likely later in adulthood, they unlearn that stuff that they've learned to, that differentiating that they've learned, and then they learn how to play nice again with each other. So that's constantly there, and the you know, it's okay, it keeps changing, and each generation is going to do it. So it's kind of a dead-end thing to say, well, we should have gotten better by now. Like, it's never going to be perfect. That's the news. I mean, that's how we are, that's how people are, and you gotta keep, and so stories like this, it's not like, I agree that it's timely, this movie, and the strength of it, that it's extremely entertaining, it's very funny, it's really well written and directed, it's great dialogue, it's got so much, and it's profound, and it's a civics lesson, a history lesson, so forth, and it is really timely right now. But it's a movie like this, when it's well made, it's always timely. It was timely 5 years ago, it's going to be timely. I think this movie, you can watch it 10 years from now and go, yeah, we got to work on that, you know. It's always going to be around, you know. But that doesn't make me sad. It makes me annoyed. I don't get afraid or sad about that I'm going to die. I find it irritating. I mean, when I first realized that when I was a little kid, like a dog died, I guess, and then a horse, and then I asked my mom, so we're going to, and, you know, so-and-so died in the family, so am I going to die? And she goes, well, she didn't want to tell me. I'm like, well, just tell me, you know. It's like, eventually it's like, okay, so I'm going to die. And I found it extremely irritating. It's like, whose idea was that? I mean, I didn't ask to come here. I'm glad I'm here, but now I gotta go at some point. It's like, so it's irritating, so do something about it. Same thing goes with racism and all that. So it's always time in this movie. I don't know why I went off there, but you know, that's what I think this movie is, because it's so good, because it's so well done, because Pete Farrelly, I mean, this movie, you look at the poster and it says Steven Spielberg or Scorsese on it, you go, yeah, what a great change of pace. That's amazing what they did. That's like a Preston Sturges of our times, you know, it's entertaining, it's great, it's funny, and yet it's deep, it's profound. But it's Pete Farrelly, and I think people are still reeling. You did an amazing thing with this movie. You really did. I mean, in every way, the writing, the directing, how you dialogue. Well, especially people that are, you know, like cinephiles or into the movie business, they're kind of still going, Pete Farrelly did that? It's like, wow. How did Pete Farrelly do that? You know, we'll ask him, he's right here. But anyway, I don't know. I just think it's a movie that's going to last.
I would just respond and say, in terms of gesture and the freedom in which Tony Lip moved, and the control that I think I was tasked with in playing Don Shirley. There isn't, you don't have the luxury of not being aware of your environment as a black person. Like, you've never had that. So there isn't, you always have to be conscious, whether you're in a white collar environment, a working class environment. I think the only time that really relaxes perhaps is around family. And so when you look at a Jamaican American man, a black man in 1962, someone who is accomplished as he is, someone who is a prolific artist, there is an opportunity to own that awareness out in the world of your presence, your education, your the affluent aspects of his life. And so therefore everything is very controlled, very conscious. Like, he's aware of how he's dressed. He's aware of how he moves, because you're constantly being observed in a way and critiqued. There's these beliefs that exist in the world about you and about your people. So someone like a Don Shirley, and the opportunity in that role is for that to be on display. Someone who lives with that type of awareness of a world that already has an opinion about you before they meet you. Like, you don't just get to pass through the world, especially in the South. Eyes are on him in the car, sitting in the back. Eyes are on him walking down the street, walking into
also that awareness of making that choice to go to the South, which you didn't have to do.
Yes.
I mean, that's what, to me, that's where it really comes in, that awareness of effect and impact in the room, and him constantly sizing people up. You're aware all the time of looking in the room when he walks into it, and almost an anxiety out of that he's trying to fight all the time, which again, that you physicalize this so subtly, it's an astonishing thing to watch. I want you to talk a little bit just in terms of always casting. You have this gift for finding people with chemistry and unusual casting, like Jeff Daniels or Viggo in this. I mean, talk about.
Well, I always think back to Jeff Daniels, actually, because that was, you know, when we were doing Dumb and Dumber, everybody said, by the way, this is probably, I don't know how many of these things we've done, but this is already like the most interesting one I've been part of. So, people are going there. But they wanted, you know, we had Jim Carrey and I wanted Jeff Daniels against him, and they said, no, get a comic actor. And I said, well, what are you talking about? They said, get a comic actor. I said, well, but he's a great actor. He's not writing it. He's not making it up. What do you mean? He's just acting. And that's how I always felt. And of course, he did it, and he did it perfectly. Jeff Daniels, some will agree. So, when I went to Viggo for this first, Viggo said, I don't know if I could do this, this role. I said, what are you talking about? You did Eastern Promises. You could do anything. And he was concerned with some of the comedy stuff, and I said, no, it's not comedy. We're avoiding the comedy. In fact, just do the role, and it will be comical. And that's what these two guys did, and this is, I keep telling them this, they say all they did was they were trying not to mess up the script, but the truth is, and one of these days they're going to admit it, is that this movie is better than the script. And by the way, I really liked the script. It was a great script. But they did really unbelievable things, nuanced acting that elevated it. Like, there were scenes, and I keep going back to the scene, but the scene where he's talking about the orphans. He goes, yeah, I got the album with the orphans. He goes, orphans? He goes, yeah, all the kids sitting around the campfire. And he goes, Orpheus. And as written, Viggo was supposed to say, what? And but instead he goes, right. Because he doesn't know what an Orpheus is. And so he's just saying what I say, right. And then to see...
I thought he mispronounced orphans.
Yeah. He goes,
nice.
Orpheus, right. That must be a different pronunciation of orphans, that's what I'm saying. But that's not in the script. And then to see Mahershala run with that, which is his reaction, we were just sitting back there howling, and it was the first moment I realized, this is really funny, because I hadn't been thinking that up to then.
Really?
Yeah, I honestly, on paper, it had some chuckles, and it had some smiles, but to see it with a crowd and hear the laughter, never saw that coming.
But see, that's what I'm saying to you, and this actually is in so many of your movies too, the pride in the way it's manifest between these two different guys. He won't admit that he doesn't know what Orpheus is, and he's trying to figure out why he won't say that he doesn't know what Orpheus is. I mean, there's real tension in that. You tend to write a lot of proud people.
Well, it's like diction, too. Let's talk about your diction. Diction in what way? Because diction in the only way the word is ever used. and it's his reaction to it. He goes, Like, he doesn't say, what are you saying? He can't do that, and that is the humor. But I'm telling you, on the page, I don't remember this many laughs. It really was these guys. They get the two best actors. No matter what anybody says about this movie, there's no movie with two better actors in it this year. And these guys go nose to nose, and they're bumping each other up the whole way, just pushing each other. And it was just a joy to behold from behind the scenes. It was amazing.
I want to ask you that, because I want to get back to this. With pride for both of you guys, it's about two incredibly proud guys who can't admit how proud they are. And each one is kind of calling the other out about it in some way that doesn't actually address it, which is so much of your movies are about the way guys deal with their being trapped and being masculine. And this is really about that as much as anything else. I wonder if that's one of the things that appeal to you guys about the material.
I never thought of it like that, and I think that's absolutely true. That's right. And I think when some of that pride begins to dissipate a bit is when they really begin to connect, and I think there's a love that forms as like two guys that would be a little bit more vulnerable. They learn things about each other that allows that to crack a bit. And but I hadn't thought of it like that, but absolutely.
Yeah, and they're each different in how they. But that's true. Pride is at the root of a lot of that. But they deal with it in different ways, You're more subtle about it, and it takes a while, and it takes me prodding him, just irritating the shit out of you, really upsetting him, until it really comes.
Yeah, I think to that point, my favorite scene is the scene you start asking about family, and he just tries to throw it away in the assumption that you won't pursue it. But it's like, what are you talking about? I'm proud of my family. Why aren't you? I mean, to me, that's really the scene. It's about pride. It's almost kind of heartbreaking to watch.
It's also about first impressions, or the limitations of first impressions, the story, I think, and that pride goes hand in hand with that. No matter who you're talking about, whether you have 3 doctorates as he does, or a 6th education as my character does, you can be ignorant. You're bound to be ignorant about anybody you meet at first. Your first impression is very limited. These guys, when they start out, I think in reality, if they didn't need to go together in this car and take this trip, I don't think they would have even gotten across the George Washington Bridge and gotten out of New York. Once you know, because the first impression, I'm not going to speak for you, but I mean, it felt like you thought I was offensive and, you know, crude and noisy, and I mean, your character's probably used to drivers who don't talk unless you ask them a question. They drive well, you know, and that's it. They don't eat and smoke and ask you questions about your family.
He still hired you though. All these things.
Well, but he needed me, right?
You found somebody else, but he still hired me. See, that's what the interesting thing. Cause it's
Well, yeah, but he was like, I mean, I imagine you might have weighed, and it's like, well, as we start out, the first few minutes, it's like, holy shit, this is going to be a long 2 months, you know? But I'm also thinking that. I'm thinking, is this it? That's it? This guy's going to be that boring? He's not going to, like, tell me anything? He's not going to reveal? He's going to keep, you know, locked up emotionally, and it's like, I can't get around and say anything. I can't smoke. I can't eat. I can't, you know, I mean, well, I can eat, but you know, it doesn't look promising. And I later learned, among other things, that he has very good reasons for being some of the ones you talked about, just in terms of the color of your skin, but also your life, and like the reason that Doc Shirley, the real one, said to Nick Vallelonga, who was sitting on this story for 25 years, he said to Pete when they started working, I said, one thing, you know, that he said to me was, you know, I don't want this movie, we can do it now, but he didn't want me to, you know, make it all this time. I don't want this movie made until after I'm gone. He's a private person, he had reason to be, you know, and whatever, his reasons, and they were respected, which is great, and the movie was made when it needed to be made. And, you know, I mean, it's a good thing, we both evolved way past our first impressions because we are forced into the situation together.
He did have some family, Dr. Shirley, and they were close for years later on. But that was the way Tony Lip perceived it, and in some ways, I wonder if it was just Dr. Shirley not wanting to talk about his family. You know, he's like, yeah, I got a brother somewhere. Like, I don't want to talk about it, Tony, but that's the way we got it. And then later, you know, since the movie has been coming out, getting attention, we've been hearing from family members who love Dr. Shirley. So I just want to clarify that.
But I just thought it's a great scene, and I wanted to, as a final question, you talked to you about why this kind of poisonous pride is something you go back to so often.
I don't know. That's a tricky one. Like, can you give me like examples?
Oh well, Woody's character in Kingpin, Ben's character. There's one of these guys in the movie where this guy is so proud. Or Matt Dillon, gosh, and something about marrying me. There's so many of these guys whose pride is this damaging thing to them, and just to have it be the source for two guys in movies is a really interesting thing to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I never thought about it like that. Honestly, I always think about it like I have definitely wounded guys. Like, you know, our guys are usually, like, he's an unusual character because, you know, despite his flaws, and he had many, he was not wounded. He felt like very confident in his own skin, very sure of himself. And Dr. Shirley, who's, you know, a brilliant concert pianist, probably had more, you know, misgivings about himself and confidence, you know, less confidence, and that happens a lot. It seems like, you know, they've done studies that were, you know, freshmen at Harvard have a lower self-esteem than, you know, the inmates at a prison. You know, seriously, it's true. You know, they're.
I hate to see the prison be in that service.
Oh, they can convince themselves that they're pretty cool, they're pretty good, and yet somebody who's really introspective might start thinking less of themselves. If you could be hard on yourself, and Tony Lip wasn't hard on himself, and Dr. Shirley was, probably.
Well, I would just add to that, and this is some of the work that I know I had to do because I didn't have access to the family. I had pieces, and I had to sort of fill in the blanks for myself. But in that scene in the car, when we start getting to the family, and Tony Lip is asking Doc Shirley questions about his family and his upbringing. For me, I think that was a bit of an Achilles heel for him, because if you start looking into characters and sort of examining like how they view themselves, how they identify in the world, especially in that time, or specifically in that time, Doc Shirley had something to hide, and that if if he didn't feel supported by his family and siblings, then so many of those other things that he was so accomplished as a musician, and he spoke 8 languages and ended up having 3 doctorates, that some of those things end up becoming shell for the tortoise, you know, and that vulnerability, that quietness, that privacy, yeah, he was a little bit, you know, reclusive in a certain way. He had something to protect, and so he was both extraordinarily strong and weak in some capacity, and so therefore had different qualities, I think, than what Tony lived at.
Even at that time especially, maybe even afraid that his family should find out. Maybe, I don't know how many of them knew about his sexuality, you know, and like that. Who knows? I mean, if your family doesn't know and you've been on the road, you're a musician, and maybe there's not the regular contact with them, even though you care about them and they care about you. But if they don't know, it's like, how at that time do you begin to even broach the subject? And it's almost like easier not to, maybe not so much contact is easier. I don't know.
Well, and one thing for me that helped me root that choice and connected me to that scene was in watching him speak about himself in 2010, a few years before he died. And in speaking about marriage, and we used it in the film, he doesn't say, the documentarian asks him something about his life or family or something like that, and he says, oh yeah, I used to be married, but I couldn't do a concert pianist act, and I can't do a husband act and a concert pianist act. But he doesn't say I'm gay, you know. And
Use the word act.
This is 2010. This is 2010.
The word husband act.
Yes, and almost associating them with. So for me, in my mind, he wasn't somebody in 2010 who was like, this is who I am. So you go back to 1962, and where is he? And he lived in New York. Like, you know, he's not in a conservative city, you know. And so those were the pieces that I had to sort of do the math on how he related to the world and identified.
It's really an emotional terms, almost like a white knuckle thing to watch. I'm sorry, we're out of time. Let's let these guys leave. Please stay in your seats here, and let's thank them all for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for staying so late.